on the Wisconsin Supreme Court after Democrat-backed Susan Crawford won about 55% of the vote. The circuit court judge defeated Trump-backed conservative judge Brad Schimmel, despite Elon Musk pouring millions of dollars into the race on his behalf. US President Donald Trump is expected to reveal new tariffs in the coming hours, marking an escalation of his global trade war. The White House has not shared details, but says the tariffs will take effect immediately. Economists warn this could lead to a sharp increase in the price of goods for US consumers and wipe out millions of jobs. Actor Val Kilmer has died at the age of 65. His daughter released a statement saying he died of pneumonia. Kilmer had largely stepped away from acting after a throat cancer diagnosis in 2014, but is known for his roles in a number of movies, including Top Gun, The Doors and Batman Forever. Comscore reports his films have made nearly $2 billion around the world. Three closely watched elections are providing a check on voter sentiment more than 2 months into Donald Trump's second presidency. In the swing state of Wisconsin, Democrat-backed judge Susan Crawford is projected to win the Supreme Court race and preserve the High Court's liberal majority.
To the people of Wisconsin, thank you!
It's a big blow to President Trump and Elon Musk, who spent time and a lot of money campaigning for conservatives. In Florida, the Republican Party will keep 2 seats in their narrow House majority after special elections to replace Mike Waltz and Matt Gaetz. But Democrats put up a fight in districts that Trump won easily. And I want to bring in Richard Johnson now, who is a senior lecturer in US politics and policy at Queen Mary University of London. Appreciate you joining us.
Good morning.
So 3 crucial tests for the Trump presidency Tuesday. The Wisconsin Supreme Court race, of course, stands out with the liberal judge Susan Crawford winning despite the efforts of Elon Musk to derail her chances with his injection of $20 million of his own money for her opponent. So what message are voters sending both Trump and Musk with this big loss, do you think?
Well, I think it shows that money doesn't buy votes in American elections. Now, American elections are the most expensive in the world, and it's one of those kind of features of American exceptionalism where the United States is truly a global outlier compared to other countries. And yet, actually, we've known in political science for quite a long time that the relationship between spending more money and receiving more votes is not a perfect relationship. And I guess what Musk was trying to do in this election was to defeat a perception, which has turned out to be an accurate one, which is that when Donald Trump is not on the ballot, Republican voters are less motivated to turn out and vote. And I think he wanted to create with his money a huge amount of excitement and attention on an election, which is what we might call a kind of lower salience election, a down ballot election. And he just simply was unable to mobilize the Trump vote. Remember, this is a state that Donald Trump won in November. And this time, not the Democrats, but the Democratic-backed candidate won the state by about 10 points. So the Democrats in Wisconsin are more motivated to turn out and vote than Republicans when there isn't a Donald Trump on the ballot, and that matters for the midterm elections next year.
And Republicans swept the 2 special House elections in Florida, as expected, of course, with significantly reduced margins, though. What do you read into that, and what message do you think Florida voters are trying to send President Trump with this vote?
I think you can read the Florida results in 2 ways. On the one hand, the Republicans' vote share in both seats went from about 66, 67% of the vote to 57% of the vote. So that's a 10-point drop. You apply that across the country. If Republicans across the country did 10 points worse than they did in November, that's very good news for the Democrats' prospects in winning the House. On the other hand, I would say that perhaps Democrats got expectations a little too high for these seats. When Donald Trump asked Elise Stefanik to withdraw her nomination for the UN ambassador because there were concerns that she would lose her New York 21 district's House seat. It turns out that if this same swing was applied in that seat, her seat would have stayed in Republican hands. And I think there are some causes for concern for Democrats in the state of Florida in particular, where the Democrats did vastly outspend the Republicans. A few weeks ago, the Democrats were outspending the Republicans 14-1. And really, I think it's not a bad night for the Democrats. The Democrats made significant gains. But I would say that the expectation, the Democrats, particularly in 6th district seat, Democrats had allowed expectations to run very, very high. And some people were even talking about the seat flipping. And we didn't really get very close to that. So I think it's important for the Democrats to, in political terms, to think about expectation management and also to think about their use of campaign funds and where that might be judiciously applied and where it might just be they have to write off a seat.
So what could all three of these crucial races mean for the midterms in 2 years and ultimately the big test in 2028? Or do you think it's too early to start suggesting what it could mean?
Well, for the first time in a decade, we are now in a political space where Donald Trump will never be on a ballot again in American politics unless something very strange happens. And so we have to now start thinking about elections, kind of post-Trump elections. And for the Republicans, I think that can be a cause for some concern because Donald Trump has been able to mobilize Republican electors to come out and vote. And there's something quite remarkable which has happened, which is that Democrats used to struggle with getting their voters out relative to Republicans, that low turnout voters were more Democratic leaning. But in recent cycles, we've seen that lower propensity voters, voters who are less likely to turn out and vote, are now trending Republican. And without the pull of Trump on the ballot, it seems that the Republicans are struggling. And that means that the midterm elections and indeed the off-year elections this year for the governor of Virginia and New Jersey will be really important tests to see if there's some other way that Republicans can mobilize and excite their voters. And if not, then I think we should expect substantial Democratic gains in the congressional and state elections.
Richard Johnson, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.